Good afternoon. Well, as you will have seen by now, there's a fairly long list of people who've been recommended for prosecution by the Zondo Commission final report. It includes people like Arthur Fraser, Duduzane Zuma, Hlaudi Motsoneng and Ace Magashule, and that's just a start. This, of course, after the state capture era, the findings about what happened at the state security agency. 125 million rand is still missing from there, by the way. Meanwhile, the money lost by the SABC, the money stolen through the Vrede Dairy scandal. Also the recommendation that our political structure be changed so we would have a standing commission on corruption with powers to investigate, and that we would vote directly for our president. Michael Marchant is the head of investigations at the organisation Open Secrets. Michael, good afternoon to you. Okay, it's a long list of people who've been recommended for prosecution. Do you believe the National Prosecuting Authority now has what it needs to actually put charges to these people?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to the viewers. I think that we have to hope that they do, in the sense that it will likely be the most important test and outcome of the Commission to see what the MPA can do over the coming months and in fact, the coming years. I think that what the hope is that the National Prosecuting Authority should have been working on many of these cases for a long time already. You know, the Commission was very clear that the work of law enforcement did not and should not indeed have stopped while it was doing its own work. And what the MPA has received, not just now, but in the years that the Commission has been running, it has benefited from the information and the evidence that has been generated by the Commission and handed over to the prosecuting authority. And I think now what is very helpful for the MPA is that it has, in the Commission's findings, I think a very clear and unambiguous roadmap, if you will, to the most important prosecutions across a range of SOEs. I think what we do need to continue to be concerned about is that the MPA still will rely to a certain degree on the police and in particular the Hawks to help them construct cases. And I think there are serious capacity concerns there. And the second thing is whether the MPA has sufficiently cleaned their own house of prosecutors who are implicated in various ways in pursuing dodgy cases during state capture or not pursuing cases that they should have done in a timeous manner. And it's going to be their willingness to deal with those issues, I think, that will really kind of set the stall about whether they can be successful now.
There's going to be an argument. I mean, some people are going to challenge the findings of this report. That seems obvious to me. Can the NPA go ahead despite those challenges? I mean, if what you say is correct, and it must be, that the NPA can just, and the Hawks should have been continuing with their own investigations, in a way, it doesn't matter if there's a challenge to the Zondo Commission findings.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things the public has been a little bit frustrated about maybe is that the Commission has not used stronger language. Often they've said, you know, the NPA or the Hawks must investigate with a view to prosecution. And that's simply because the rules of a commission are entirely different to the criminal process. But that does have the advantage of whether the Commission is taken on review and how long it takes the President, for example, to approach Parliament with his plan of action about how to address the recommendations. That should not slow down law enforcement authorities in moving on some of these cases. And the benefit of the Commission is that you're not using the report as evidence to prosecute someone. You're using the evidence generated by the Commission's work, the investigators, the evidence leaders, work with that and your own investigation to bring criminal charges. And I think that there are many that we would expect the MPA should be able to bring in a matter of months if they are giving it the attention that it deserves.
Michael, we need to be very careful what we're talking about here. We're talking about some people with serious power. We all know what Arthur Fraser is capable of. He must have resources. 125 million rand is still unaccounted for from the State Security Agency. Look at the political power that he has and the information that he clearly has around President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Phala farm. Tulani Dlomo, another person recommended for prosecution from the State Security Agency, accused of being involved in the violence in KwaZulu-Natal last year, a claim he denies. In a way, it seems to me that this is a test of whether our state is actually strong enough, whether it's capable enough to go after these people.
Stephen, I think that that's an accurate reflection of what the problem is here. If anything, what the State Capture Commission findings over 5,000 pages, what they show is the erosion of institutions within the state and the erosion of the kind of independence and controls that we would usually expect. And what the result of that is that so much of the discourse about accountability that plays out in the South African public is about the infighting of different political actors within the ANC and different parts of the state hurling mud at each other. Whereas in reality, if the South African state is to survive and rebuild, it's about rebuilding institutions to act on their own independent mandate to fulfill their constitutional mandate and duty, regardless of what political principles might want them to do. That goes for reforming our intelligence agencies, but I think particularly coming out of the report, there are concerns around Parliament and law enforcement and the National Prosecuting Authority. And those actors should not be acting under the direction of any president or political principal in the executive. They should be acting without fear or favor. And I absolutely agree with you. It's not going to be easy, but this is now the test. The evidence is on their side, and it is a test of the leadership at the NPA and these other institutions as to whether they can be successful and withstand what will inevitably be a very vehement pushback by those actors that you've mentioned.
You refer to the role of Parliament, and I mean, if you read the report, if you look at the findings, I mean, it's obvious and it's clear, and we saw it from the testimony, that Parliament failed. And Parliament failed to be a check on the executive because MPs for the ANC, in the main, refused to do the work and to actually check what was happening in Parliament. I mean, we all remember how Parliament voted against doing anything over in Kanda. That's not even a state capture story, really, and that just reveals the sort of extent of it. Do you think the recommendations around perhaps a directly elected president, around a standing commission, some kind of body, we have plenty of bodies, but a new body to stop corruption, do they go far enough?
Stephen, I'll be honest, I would have two concerns, I think, with those types of recommendations. The first is that it's often appealing to have ideas about a new body. As you say, we often talk about creating new institutions, new bodies for the purposes of accountability. But I think, you know, in our country and just generally, we can't create bodies to replace the role of Parliament. The elected representatives of the country, we cannot write them off and say that if Parliament fails, we create parallel institutions to do their job. And then I think that takes us to the second question about electoral reform. You know, honestly, when I read the Commission's recommendations, it is a little bit firing from the hip in terms of directly electing the president. You know, there have been many organizations in South Africa over a long period of time doing extensive, complicated research on what electoral reform would mean. And I think really we need to return to them. Organizations like My Vote Counts is doing a lot of work on that now, to say, look, we need, as civil society, to take these kinds of questions forward. And then, of course, I think then it becomes a political question about if there is a continued failure of our elected representatives in Parliament and otherwise, there will be electoral consequences. And that is what, indeed, the ANC has been experiencing over a number of years.
To put it another way, the ANC is losing support because it allowed state capture to happen. Some people have suggested that we're entering an area of more accountable politics. In other words, there's no one dominant party. Do you think just that alone could maybe stop state capture from ever happening again?
I'm not sure that can work alone. I think that it's a huge part of the puzzle. What we've seen, though, and you know, we've seen it play out at a local level, is that greater political contestation is no guarantee of suddenly a move towards accountability and fixing some of these issues. Very often, and this is an experience not just in South Africa but around the world, it leads to a period of very messy politics and often an entrenchment and a contestation around access to corrupt rents and other things of that nature. And I guess that takes me back to that original point that I made, is that the political contestation, I think, is helpful because it is a recognition that if you are going to continue to have competitive and free and fair elections, that you will be punished if you tolerate things like state capture. But at the same time, those institutions of the state, such as the MPA and other places, they need to be protected, they need to have constitutional independence, and they need to be shielded from political interference, and they need to continue doing their work because those are absolutely essential kind of bulwarks against abuse within other elements of the state.
Michael, there have been certain countries at certain times which have almost had a culture of corruption and a culture of violence. I mean, one can think of the United States during Prohibition, for example. There was a sort of culture of just breaking the law. Everyone was doing it. One could think of other times in European history where this has happened. Some people would talk to the era of Sani Abacha in Nigeria, where everybody just looked at the government and knew it was corrupt. There's a concern, perhaps, that maybe a culture of corruption has started to enter parts of our society. I come across people who have a sense of despair, you know, just a sense of being betrayed by government. And part of this is also the role that individuals played. I mean, I can count maybe once or twice. I don't even need a whole hand to count the number of MPs from the governing party, the ANC, who refused to accept what former President Jacob Zuma was doing, at least on the version of the report. It's also about making sure that people follow their consciences. I don't know if we have an agreement on what the right thing to do is sometimes.
I think you're right, Stephen, and I think that, as you say, if you have a culture within the political leadership, and also I think I would argue in many instances in state capture across corporate South Africa and corporations around the world, that this kind of conduct and this kind of impunity is fine, that inevitably bleeds into other parts of the society, that there is a feeling that if no one is playing by the rules of the game, why should I? I mean, I think that is why the ability of the MPA to move on cases quite quickly is going to be so crucial. Because from the public's perspective, I think that it is unavoidable that the thing that they want to see most is some accountability for those members of parliament, for other people that have been implicated. And I think that that's the only way that you begin to shift that. And yes, I think that is really the crucial factor there.
I mean, it keeps coming back to the same thing. There's a reason that former President Jacob Zuma, on the version of many, and I would agree with this version, weakened the NPA deliberately from the very start.
Completely, and I think that we need to go back even further than that, is that we know, and this is one of the ironies, of course, of the way that our politics has played out. The final Zondo Commission report identifies Mo Sheikh as someone who attempted to investigate the Gupta family within state security and was shut down by the President and then Minister Siyaboga Twele at the time to say you cannot undertake this investigation. But of course, in 2008, Mo Sheikh was a crucial part of the faction within the ANC that shut down the Scorpions. And even before that, he was part of a crew that targeted then National Director of Public Prosecutions, Bulelani Ngcuka, in order to undermine his position. And so we can almost go all the way back to the arms deal and Jacob Zuma's role there and the Mbeki administration. That was really when the rot set in terms of targeting the MPA and targeting law enforcement, disbanding the Scorpions, to ensure that there wasn't a skilled, resourced, and independent body or set of bodies in our state to hold politicians to account. It was absolutely a deliberate campaign to undermine that. And that's why, in a sense, as you say, that if it starts there, that's almost where we need to return to. The Zondo Commission has a range of ideas around legislative reform, and I think all of those are crucial. We do need to look at how whistleblowers are protected, strengthening the Party Funding Act. All of those things are absolutely true. But as long as we have a law enforcement agency and an NPA that isn't prosecuting people in terms of the Corrupt Activities Act or the PFMA, those legal changes, frankly, are not going to matter. They have to go hand in hand.
Michael Marchant, thank you, Head of Investigations at the organisation Open Secrets. Do appreciate it. Of course, a lot more news, more conversations around this to come.